The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Hubert Alexander Minnis, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. May I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
I will just go for one bilat.
I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and I invite him to address the General Assembly.
Thank you. Mr. President, Excellencies, I congratulate Madam President on her election to the presidency of this 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish to assure you and members of the Bureau of the support of my delegation. I commend Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who continues to guide the organization through a process of reform, which is vital for the continued relevance of our organization. I also pay tribute to the late Kofi Annan for an immense contribution he made to the UN and the global community. Mr. President, in this year, marking the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War, it is fitting that the theme for this 73rd session is making the United Nations relevant to all people, global leadership, and shared responsibilities for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. One of the painful lessons taught by the two world wars was the necessity of nations working together to minimize conflicts and to promote economic and social development. The relevance of the UN to the global community is without question. This is not to say, Mr. President, that we ought not to strive to achieve more. This is an imperative. As nations, we must intensify our deliberations and commitments to addressing climate change. Climate change is a clear and present danger to us all, but in particular to low-lying coastal nations like the Bahamas. We see this in rising sea levels, the loss of coral reefs, the increased volume of acid in our oceans, and more severe and frequent hurricanes and typhoons. This time last year, the Bahamas, many countries of the Caribbean, and parts of the United States of America faced the onslaught of Category 4 or higher hurricanes. As Hurricane Irma hurled towards the Bahamas, my government took the difficult decision to evacuate residents from the southern islands to prevent the loss of lives and injury. Gratefully, we escaped without loss of life, but our southern neighbors were not as fortunate. As such, I fully support Secretary General his plan to call a climate summit next September to mobilize action and financial support. As part of such discussions, we must dedicate considerably more energy and resources in building the resilience and sustainability of our island and coastal nations. Like our neighbors, the Bahamas is trying to rebuild our islands. However, the consecutive damage of more hurricanes has made this very difficult. As an archipelago, with many islands stretching approximately 600 miles from north to south, we are required to replicate infrastructure many times over with already limited resources. While the delivery of humanitarian aid is essential, it is equally important to focus on prevention and the strengthening of capacity building. Such an approach must be grounded in a comprehensive approach to sustainable development that addresses in an integrated manner the range of issues that are critical to the Bahamas, from disaster risk reduction to the sustainable use of the world's seas and oceans to ensure their viability for generations and generations to come. Tourism is the world's largest industry. It is also the lifeblood of the Bahamian economy. Millions of tourists travel to the Bahamas annually because of our beautiful turquoise waters and biodiversity. And in this context, the Bahamas has committed to ban single-use plastics by 2020. The Bahamas looks forward to the successful outcomes of the review of the Samoa Pathway, the international framework to advance these and other sustainable development priorities for small island development states. The Bahamas will also advocate for a strong outcome of the Intergovernmental Conference on an international, legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. Mr. President, earlier this week, I participated in the Bloomberg Roundtable on building resilience, resilient economies, and preserving marine ecosystems in coastal Commonwealth nations. I commend such dialogue. However, I must stress that the Bahamas and our neighbors are being beaten twice for circumstances not of our own making. It is not our island nations that are primarily responsible for the climate change, which results in the scourge of hurricanes and other natural disasters. However, when we respond to national need by borrowing internationally to seek to restore basic human infrastructure, our debt to GDP ratio rises, risking the possibility of a rating downgrade. This limits our ability to provide for ourselves, except we are burdened with a price tag too heavy to be borne. Mr. President, a relevant UN should urgently facilitate a meaningful dialogue on the international stage to establish a workable solution. Furthermore, the adverse impact of the global financial inequity is seen in the use of the distorted matrix of GDP per capita as a measurement of national wealth and viability. This is done without due regard to a country's vulnerabilities and the weight that should be given to localized circumstances. We remain concerned and disappointed that the application of this matrix causes the Bahamas to be assessed more favorably than it should be for contributions to international organizations and for receipt of grants and international assistance when disaster strikes. The UN must bring greater focus and action in response to this inequitable issue. We also reaffirm our support for Cuba's ability to access resources for development to rebuild after disasters. Similarly, notwithstanding the strong and unwavering commitment to the integrity of our financial services industry, the Bahamas, like other jurisdictions, is in an uphill battle to avoid being blacklisted as a non-cooperative jurisdiction for tax purposes. The goalposts for cooperation are constantly being moved. They are inequitably applied with unfair advantages to some and disadvantages to others. The Bahamas remains committed to international tax transparency and cooperation, exchange of information and international regulatory standards, as well as to conduct business in a fair, transparent, and competitive manner. Madam President, the Bahamas is comprehensively seeking to offer greater opportunities to our disadvantaged urban centers through revitalization, economically empowering, and poverty alleviation initiatives. These initiatives have been designed to be consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals. My government is committed to the SDGs and will continue to work with the UN and other international partners and domestic stakeholders towards implementation. Mr. President, the Bahamas is dedicated to serving as a productive presence and committed member of the Council of the International Maritime Organization. We have presented our candidature for re-election to Category C in the elections in 2019. The Bahamas intends to continue its work to make positive and innovative contributions toward ensuring the safety and security of shipping and the prevention of marine pollution by maritime vessels. The Bahamas remains committed to the protection and promotion of human rights and to gender equality. The geographical location of the Bahamas has made us particularly vulnerable to illegal migration. We have been embattled by this for decades. We are resolute, however, to fight illegal migration and to do so in a manner that prioritizes the safety and security of the Bahamas while adhering to human rights principles. The Bahamas, Madam President, is committed to the use of information communication technology to support development. We have offered ourselves as the smart choice with our candidature for the Council of the International Telecommunication Union. The Bahamas has been endorsed by our CARICOM neighbors. Mr. President, the world continues to make progress in myriad areas of economic, political, and social development. But progress requires the eternal vigilance of every generation and a commitment to upholding the dignity and equality of all people and relenting international cooperation. I wish to reaffirm the commitment of the Bahamas to the principles enshrined in the charter of this great organization. I thank you, Mr. President, on behalf of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas for the statement just made. Request protocol to escort His Excellency. The Assembly will hear a statement by His Excellency Thomas Motsoahe